our jam session today with the topic Best Practices in Deploying Communication Applications, Cloud versus On-Premises versus Hybrid. The speaker of this session is Dan York, Director of Conversation. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Sabina, and thank you for everyone who is joining us today. I'm going to talk a bit over the next, well, we have an hour blocked off, but we'll be talking about what we found in the process of the last 10 years, really, of deploying customer applications. And now I'm focusing around communications applications in particular. Before we get going, though, a couple of minor details. First of all, we will be doing a Q&A session at the end, and in the GoToWebinar control panel that you have, there's a section down at the bottom with questions, and we would encourage you to ask your questions there. Please raise them. If you are tweeting anything out here, you can use the hashtag Voxeo, and if you don't know what any of that meant, well, that's okay. And a recording will be available after the event at the blogs.voxeo.com/bestpractices page. So let's get going. First of all, if you're not with Voxeo, we were started in 1999. Today, we're the world's largest hosted voice XML and CC XML platform. We are a global provider of communications applications, and we also have a premise application, which was created in 2006, really 2005, 2006, at the behest of customers who wanted to use our software but wanted to use it in their own data centers. As the bullets say, over 200,000 developers, 45,000 companies use our platforms in various different ways. And you'll hear us talk a lot about unlocked communications, customer obsession, communications passion. Those are all part of the core DNA of what makes Voxeo. Now, over these years, we've had people create applications. Really, we say if you can use a phone with it, somebody's created an application, ranging from very large-scale IVR systems that people have used for very large insurance companies, very large cable companies, lots of things like that, to outbound notification systems. If you've received a message that your school has been canceled or that your prescription is ready, it very well could have been running on a Voxeo platform. If you've used any kind of self-service portal, if you've used Facebook applications that can bring people together into a conference or alternate reality game type of things tied into a website. Basically, if you can do it with a phone, somebody has worked with it. And over the past few years, we've gone from just phone to also supporting SMS and IM and even social channels like Twitter. So a lot of people have built a lot of those different applications. From our perspective, as I alluded at the beginning, we don't really have a great preference whether you deploy into the cloud or onto the premise. We support both. Our Prophecy product, which is our main application server that runs our applications, came from a hosted perspective, and it runs on a premise on Linux, on Windows, or on Mac OS X. And likewise, our Voice Objects platform, which is a service creation environment. It lets you go and create applications and link them into real-time analytics, link them into databases, do all of that. It can run either on-premise or with our new Voxeo or Voice Objects on Demand, it can run up in the hosted cloud as well. So we don't really have a preference. We can support either way, or as we'll talk about later, hybrid environments as well. A key point to note about what we do and part of what we provide is that it is the identical software whether you are on-premise or on the cloud. So you can build your apps on a premise or you can build them up in a hosted cloud, either way. Now, before I get in there, I started to talk about cloud, and let's talk a little bit about what that means, because today everything seems to be the cloud. If you go and put cloud on, slap it on everything. And in my brain, in my mind, what I talk about when I say the cloud is basically running your applications on a hosted environment where you're not necessarily just running it on a server. You're running it somewhere up in the cloud. You don't have to care about whether it's on a specific server or whether it's on a specific place or anything else. It's just running up there in the application portal. We used to call this hosted environments, then we called it SaaS, software as a service, for a while, then we called it application service platforms, and all of those different variations. But certainly today we talk a lot about the cloud, and I'm thinking of it in that term. Running applications, running services up in a hosted environment sometime. So what are some of the advantages? I mean, certainly one of the big ones we've seen from our customers is that they can rapidly deploy. So I want to talk about the cloud advantages right now as far as what's there. You can just quickly deploy it. You typically don't need to go and ask permission of somebody else to go and do it. You can just go and put it up there. Easy pay-as-you-go type of environment. Very simple, very easy to go and use. It's also highly, highly scalable. And this is one of the big advantages that you can get in a cloud communication service versus what you would have on a typical enterprise. You typically don't have the ability to go to the extreme that a cloud communication service can do because you just don't have that capacity. In a cloud environment, you're aggregating across all of the customers the bandwidth capabilities of the cloud communication service, so you can go and you can burst out to very large amounts of traffic simultaneously in ways that it would be very difficult to do for a typical enterprise. You all have extremely high level of reliability, assuming you are talking to a cloud communication service that will provide this, but you can have service level agreements, 24/7 monitoring. The other key part is when you're looking at communication systems, multiple PSTN connections, multiple internet connections, those type of things can be challenging for a typical premise operation to go and work with. You need to have that kind of ability, and something that a hosted environment, a cloud, can be able to provide for you is that interconnection out there. When we rolled out SMS and IM, we've built those connections out into the IM network, into the Skype network, into other places in ways that, it's possible for enterprises to do, but not necessarily with the redundancy and the level that you can do in a cloud environment. Typically, a cloud communications environment will also have a high level of physical security. Okay, so you would be able to, in most cloud environments, you'll have a high level of physical security in the actual data centers that are there. So you'll be able to go and they're protected. It's typically, it might be a PCI compliant environment. They've got a lot of network security. You also can do things like I mentioned on here, hosted voice biometrics. You can do a lot of different ways to add security to components because it's all out there in these data centers that are shared facilities that are being able to go and comply with these kind of levels of things. You also, with a cloud environment, you have the ability to go and project yourself worldwide. You have geographic coverage across the world in whatever environment you're doing. So it might be that if you need connectivity into the UK, you would be able to get inbound and outbound connectivity through the hosted cloud out into those environments. If you need Asia presence, if you need things like that, you can be able to go and create that through the worldwide coverage that a cloud would have. One of the key parts, the reason I like the cloud, and I'm a big proponent of that, the things I like about the cloud is the ability to go and future-proof. I hate that word on a certain level, but it is a good word as far as it keeps your app able to evolve with changing consumer preferences. Two examples I show up here on the slide. One was when we went and added text capabilities to our hosted voice platform. Everybody's application that was running up in our cloud was suddenly able to go and start sending text messages. That was it. We just went, deploy the capability up there in the cloud, and people could literally just go in and click on a little button there that you see. It says voice, phone calls, text messaging, or both. That was simple. When we added Twitter to our Tropo cloud communication service, you were able to just go into your application and say, I want to activate Twitter with this. That kind of capability, that kind of easily expansion is a key part of what makes the cloud so ideal for people who are doing these type of things. It also allows people to do rapid prototyping, experimentation. You can go and play with it because the friction to get started is very minimal. There's very few barriers to entry. You can just go and get started. And I think for us, we certainly see that as key as we look at all these evolving different communication mechanisms people are having. We're doing a lot more now with even with Facebook and with mobile applications, and people looking at all about the apps and what they're putting on there and how are people able to go and connect in. Because, again, in a cloud environment, it's being deployed across many customers. The cloud provider can typically go and make it more available in a way that's often faster than what a typical enterprise can go and deploy. There's also some strong advantages when you think about DR, disaster recovery and business continuity planning, because when your application is running up in the hosted environment, it's in the cloud. It's not necessarily contingent on what happens to your offices, to your places here. I live up in New Hampshire, and we had a couple of offices of companies down in the Boston area that were damaged in the recent ice and some of the storms that we had here, and a couple offices were literally knocked off the internet. And their premise data centers were shut down. Now, with the cloud and the ability that you had there, applications that were running up in the hosted cloud, were able to continue functioning, continue working. The company was continuing to get its calls and be able to perform and do all of that. Now, the contrary side of this, of course, is that you need to talk to your cloud communications provider about what is their DR and business continuity plan, because what happens if one of their data centers goes down? How does it impact your applications? What do you have to think about? But from an application point of view, the beauty of it can be that it can be up there running in the cloud and just keep on running regardless of what is happening to your specific facility. The other thing that's very attractive about cloud services, about hosting services, is the pricing, because it's typically a per minute price. It's often pay as you go, so you just sign up for what you need. If you need to bump up your pricing, you can do that, or you can bump it down. Some vendors will give you like a prepaid option like you'd have with cell phones, where you can get a contract and you get a certain rate. Others will be just straight as you go along. Some vendors will offer various different options around that. And from a budgeting point of view, it's an operational expense. It's a monthly recurring expense versus a capital purchase. And that can be a critical component as people are looking at where they put their dollars and what they're going and doing in there. So these are all key advantages of really what the cloud can bring. So if I'm talking about all this, you might say, so why even consider a premise installation? What can it do? And the answer is there's some very strong reasons to look at a premise installation. A key one that we've come into a number of times is very specific security requirements. We had customers, as I mentioned, Voxeo started out back in 1999 and 2000 as a hosted platform. And then in 2006, we rolled out a premise product because of the fact that we had customers who wanted to bring it into their data centers, and several of them had very specific, very stringent security requirements that they had to meet. Some of them were internal policies that just said, thou shalt not have information running on external services. Others were various different compliance components, various different pieces that were there. And so, for those reasons, they wanted to bring it onto their local center, behind their firewall. And that's a perfectly legitimate reason for wanting to bring an application inside there. Another big one is, as people go and create database-driven applications, the cool thing is if you're looking at what you can do these days, you can create a high-level personalization so that, for instance, a caller can be coming in, and if they're a caller that returns very frequently, you could give them a different menu than somebody who's calling in for the first time. Or you could customize it. If it's an insurance company and you do a database dip to find out that this person only has auto insurance, well, then you don't even bother offering them the options for home insurance and life insurance. You just go right into the auto menu. You can create a high level of personalization, which can create a high level of customer loyalty, just all around get the customers the information they want in the fastest means possible. Well, to do that, you really need to have a very highly database-driven application, and oftentimes that needs to be where the app server, the application server, is right near where the actual database is. You certainly can deploy this into a cloud environment, and we've had customers who do this, and then they may deploy a copy of the database into a managed server, into a hosted server near, again, in the data center, or in the cloud server, so that it can be able to have low latency. Or they might have a dedicated bandwidth, dedicated connection between one of, in our case, our data centers and their data center to provide the high-speed connection between there. But very often it makes more sense to put this onto a premise where you can have a direct connection between the application server and the environment that's generating the files and the actual database and the web services. So another good reason to look at a premise environment. Also, sometimes, you've already got data centers. The enterprise has already built out these large-scale data centers. They want to use them. They've got the capacity. You've got the staff. You've got the capability. And so it makes sense to go and leverage what you have to be able to use those and deploy that in that sense. And likewise, on the pricing side, sometimes there's positions where it makes more sense to just pay a per-port pricing and just a fixed cost plus support, maintenance, those type of things. And sometimes it's better for capital expenditure versus OpEx. And so there's different reasons why you may want to pursue this type of premise installation. What we find as we talk to our customers and what we've looked at it is generally when you look at the total cost of ownership, typically starting out with hosting is very inexpensive. You can just start, and get going. It's simple, go pay, sign up, and start building your applications. Or in our case, in Voxeo's case, you can just go and sign up. You don't have to pay anything. It's all free developers. You can just go and start building your application. So it's easy, no friction, get going, get started. Then at some point, as the minutes start to build, it becomes something where you've already, your company's built to a certain capacity, you've already got data centers, it makes sense to bring it in-house. And then what we find is that at the higher end, as applications get bigger or as companies get bigger, things become more mainstream, so it becomes a point where it makes sense to bring it back into hosting because the cost of running the data center and all the connectivity just gets to be way too much. So it's an interesting dynamic. A lot of times we see small startups or small teams within larger companies who start out in the hosting side, and at some point it may go in the premise, and at some point it may come back. As to say, some people start out with premise and do it the whole way, and other people start out in hosting and stay in hosting the entire time. But that's the kind of curve we often see people going through. When you look at a little bit deeper into what that total cost of ownership is in a premise environment and something like that, you've typically got network connectivity, you've got the hardware, the staff, and all that, but you're also assuming typically even traffic, and that comes into some of those variables that do increase these costs. If you want to have redundancy of your servers, you've got multiple servers, you've got software licenses, those types of things. You have telco redundancy, multiple connections out there. You have monitoring. You also have spiky traffic, and that can be a challenge there. But the spiky traffic gets into what's interesting that you can do in this era of IP communications is that you can actually look at how to create hybrid models where you have a premise installation that is used for the regular traffic that you have, just the kind of main flow of what you have, and then you look at how you can use hosting, the cloud, for failover or for overflow. So we have some customers who will have a certain capacity on their premise, and then what will happen is they will, in seasonal variation, it'll fail over into the cloud. Well, I shouldn't say fail over, that's the wrong example, and there it's the overflow into the cloud, where they can be able to have additional calls when their ports are all used up on premise. The next calls coming in can just automatically wind up into the hosted cloud and be able to work there. Because in our case, it's the same software, the application can seamlessly run either in the hosted cloud or on the company's premise. We also have people going back to that business continuity and the disaster recovery example that I mentioned before. Classic case where you can have the application running on your premise, but you can also have a certain amount of capacity up in the hosted cloud. So if there is a problem, whether it's something as tragic as a fire or something that happens there, or whether it's just the proverbial backhoe that goes through the internet connection or something like that, you can have some capacity up in the hosted cloud that can ensure that your communication is continuing to go on. We also find some people doing some prototyping. They'll do some experimentation with cloud and capacity up there that is also on the premise, and are doing some interesting ways to use hybrid models in that respect. So it's kind of interesting. One of the key enablers of all this is the fact that we have progressed to a point in communications where we're using IP communications, where we're using typically all based on the session initiation protocol, SIP, where we can go and have a rich interconnect between a hosted platform and an on-premise call center or other infrastructure. If you think to the PSTN and just traditional calls, if you wanted to do something, I'll just give a basic example. Say you had a customer satisfaction survey that you wanted to do, at the end of a call from a contact center, the traditional PSTN way would be you transfer that call out to a host environment where this customer sat survey might run, and then it might do its thing, and then it would transfer the results back through a web interface or something. But you wouldn't be able to really customize that app. In the era of SIP, you're able to go and pass very rich headers. So you can say, what call flow did somebody take through the path of the main application? That can be passed to the customer satisfaction survey, which could then personalize the questions for the call flow, for the other information the person had. And when the call is done, it can pass the rich headers back to the contact center so they can be able to have that fed directly into real-time analytics or business intelligence, other pieces like that. So it's a very powerful story that's brought about by the fact that we're all doing this over voice over IP communications. And that enables this hybrid environment where you can be able to put the intelligence where it makes sense and put the connectivity and the communications where it makes sense as well. So some questions to think about considering whether you want to go cloud or premise or some kind of hybrid. A key question is, can you get better capabilities in the cloud than you can on your enterprise? If you are able to deliver what you need, on your own premise, if you've already got the infrastructure, you've got the PSTN connectivity, you've got the internet connectivity, if you've already got that, then there's really little incentive for you necessarily to go and look out there at what the cloud has, outside of perhaps disaster recovery, some of the other capabilities. If you've already got that, then premise may make sense. Can you deploy faster? If you've got internal processes that make it hard for you to go and deploy applications quickly, then the cloud can provide a way to take away that friction, let you go and do it. On the other hand, if you've got a very rapid process to deploy, it's all under your control, you can go and do it there, then it may make a lot of sense for you to go and look at what you can do on the premise. Some other questions to think about. If you're looking at a choice of premise and cloud options or considering a hybrid option, is it the same software? There's a number of different folks out there who provide a premise solution and they also provide a cloud solution, but they turn out to be two very different products. And so you don't have the flexibility to rapidly take your software, your applications running on your premise and move it up into the cloud, or vice versa. You don't have that kind of ability. So it's a key question. Is it the same software? Because if it is, then you can go and take it and deploy it. In our case, we have the same software for production on-premise, for production up in our cloud, and also just for developers to use for free. So I can build an application on my MacBook Pro laptop here, and I could go and deploy it onto a Windows server in my premise environment, or I could deploy it up onto a hosted Linux server up in the cloud. It doesn't matter to me. Actually, I don't even have to care about what the operating system is. I can just deploy it up into the cloud, and it will be running on there. It's the same software in all of those environments. It's a key component that enables you to be agile and flexible and work with that. The companion to that is that other question. Are you locked in? One of the key tenets I mentioned back at the beginning around Voxeo is this whole theme we have of unlocked communications. We want people to come and work with us and stay with us because they want to, not because they're required to. Unfortunately, there's a lot of lock-in going on in the cloud because many providers view it as a great way to go and lock people into their own proprietary systems and their own ways to go and work with that. So a key thing to think about is, are you locked in? Can you take your applications and run them on somebody else's cloud? Are they based on open standards like VoiceXML and CCXML and pieces like that that enable you to go and work with somebody else's IVR platform or somebody else's creation environment? Can you go and do that easily? If the answer is yes, then great, look at that. If the answer is no, you need to think about, is that important to you? Do you want the flexibility and the control to be able to go and move if you wanted to? I mentioned the IP communications already, the ability to go and have that kind of deep and rich integration. Real-time analytics, business intelligence. It's key these days to be able to see what are people doing in your environment, what are they looking at? How can you make changes and tweak things to be able to change your application to have it perform better, convert better, get people the information they want faster? In the end of the day, we're doing all this to get people information, to help them, to build stronger, more loyal customers, and ultimately drive the revenue of our company. What can you do? What kind of real-time analytics can you get to enable you to go and do that? Can you get that out of the cloud? Can you see what's going on? How can that all work for you? Another piece on the security side, and those of you who know me know that I also chair the Global Voice over Security Alliance, VoIPSA, and so security is a huge issue for me, a concern for what I look at. And I go back to some of these questions. The cloud only works if it's there. If the cloud isn't available to you, then, hello, it's dead. So you got to be sure it's there. So that's the question that you have to be asking your providers. What kind of availability guarantees are there? What kind of service level agreements? Things like geographic redundancy, network redundancy, physical redundancy. These are key components which you may not think to ask when you just go to that web page and sign up with a credit card because it's simple and easy. And for proof of concept and experimentation, you may not need to care because everything's in beta, right? But when you're actually looking to go run production apps, you need to think about and find out about what level of support? How can I be sure the cloud will be there? So, again, geographic. If a hurricane hits a certain area, or a blizzard, or a tornado, or a fire, or pick your environmental disaster, whatever it may be, something there, will it take out the data centers that are running your applications? Is there redundancy between those? Is there, can the application fail over into some kind of location? Does the cloud provider, does the hosted provider provide a level of monitoring that works with you? Is it better than what you have on your enterprise? Or do you provide better monitoring yourself? Again, a question that goes back to the premise versus hosting. If the company is providing a 24/7 network operations center that provides monitoring and alerting when something happens, you may be able to get a much better performance out of that monitoring than you may be able to staff yourself. So it's one of those questions. What do you have? Scalability, security, and finally a note there too. If there is downtime, if the proverbial backhoe strikes somewhere, if something goes on there, how quickly are you notified? Will the vendor credit you if there's some problem with that? What will they do to ensure that you are in fact running on that? So in the end of all that, that's really the kind of key questions you need to be asking, those past two slides that I have here as far as, these kind of questions around the cloud. Can you get our capabilities? Can you deploy faster? Are you locked in? What kind of analytics? What kind of communications do you have? All the security questions to talk about. Is it available? And these are kind of, but do I get better service, better capability, better innovation in the cloud? Or am I able to deliver that on my enterprise? Which way will you go and work with it? I think in the end, the question about whether to go into the cloud or to go onto your premise really comes down to, the proverbial it depends. Because it depends on what you're trying to do. Today, the reality is we have such good bandwidth and such good capacity up in the hosted cloud that most of the time, hosted offerings generally make sense because you've got that capacity, you've got the ability to go and play, you've got the ability to go and create applications rapidly, you've got that innovation and that ability to go and quickly go and work with that. So unless you have your own large-scale data center infrastructure already, most of the time a hosted offering is probably going to be what will make the most sense. But again, if you have specific security requirements, if you have your own infrastructure, if you have your own capacity, a premise installation may be the right choice for you. And hybrid may be a choice as well, and once you look at that. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to this URL that I have on this page, which is voxeo.com about white papers. We have a prophecy hosting white paper up there, which is a very detailed look at what we provide. So it answers these questions and the type of things that I've provided over the last couple of slides around Voxeo's platform and what we can do. You can also try it out directly yourself. If you go to voxeo.com/free, we have there both premise versions of our software, both our prophecy software and our voice objects application lifecycle product. And we also have sign-ups to go and sign up for our hosted offerings as well if you'd like to try any of them out. We're also always glad to talk to folks. You can contact us at sales@voxeo.com, or if you go to our www.voxeo.com at the top, there is a little box where you can chat with somebody over a live web chat, or you can email us, or you can call us on a variety of different phone numbers. So before we go to questions, I just want to mention that we do have some more of these best practices webinars coming up. You can go to blogs.voxeo.com/best practices to see them. And we have a number of different topics coming up. You can see the list here. We'd also be very curious to hear what you'd like to hear us talk about. We've had a lot of customers come through, and we've got a lot of knowledge that we're looking to mine and share out to you folks to help you understand how you can build better applications and work with that as well. Also, if you're of a technical bent and you'd like to learn about some more technical, more detailed items, we have our developer jam sessions, which come out every month, and there's a URL you can go to see what's been there. Our most recent jam session just a couple weeks ago was actually on Voice Objects on Demand, which is our cloud-based version of Voice Objects, where one of our folks, Tobias Goebel, walked through what's the process, how it works, how to deploy applications in the cloud, how you can work with it and do all that. We've got a number of good topics coming up here, with IPv6 being a big topic these days. We've got a session planned to talk a bit about that and a bit about how you can deploy communications applications onto a server running IPv6 and some of the pieces that are around with that. You can see other items, wideband audio. We have some very cool migration tools to help people move from older formats into, so we'll talk about that and some more. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the questions. Again, if you have not seen that, you can go to the GoToWebinar panel and you can start to ask some questions that are there. And I have a question saying, so what are some of the acronyms, PCI, SOX, some of those pieces that are there? So PCI is the payment card industry. It's the security standard that has been developed for the basic credit cards. And when you go through the process to become PCI compliant, you go through with a third-party firm that goes and analyzes all your security. They do penetration tests. They do a lot of look at the processes that you build to go through that and ensure that you are protecting the personally identifiable information that is part of that. So, so it's a critical program. It's part of what MasterCard, Visa, American Express, all those companies require of the vendors who work with them. PCI compliance has also become something that people are using in a larger environment, as far as they're using as a checkbox, because they can say, well, if it's good enough for the credit card companies, then it must be good enough for me. So it is something that's there. It's a process that Voxeo's gone through and work with that as well. Sarbanes-SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, and some of the compliance legislation that's there. Okay, I've got another question here about hosted environments and compliance with local legislation. Yeah, so that's a curious issue. And part of why, for instance, we operate European data centers is that some companies, there are certain European privacy legislation and so on that requires, that the servers are being run in basically European data centers or not in the U.S., et cetera. So you may have reasons to go in and comply with local geographic legislation, and that may be something you need to be thinking about when you're talking to a cloud vendor, as far as are they able to go and provide you with the ability to comply with the local legislation that you have. It can be a funky space in some of those areas. We have this world that geography doesn't really matter in the world of IP, except, of course, when you have to comply with local legislation for your country or anything else. So it becomes a curious space there. Other questions? Again, you can raise these through your GoToWebinar place there. So one question was, can you connect a premise installation to hosted services like instant messaging? And so yes, actually you can do that. We have the capacity. Some of you may know we purchased a company a while ago called Iamified, and it has the capacity to connect you with hosted services like instant messaging, text messaging, SMS, even Twitter, those type of things. That service can be connected to a on-premise installation of Prophecy or of voice objects, etc. So you can be able to work with that. So yes, it is possible to use hosted services like that and connect them down to a premise server. Oh, good. Getting some good questions in here. So have you ever run the TCO comparison when deploying Prophecy premise to a colo or even the Voxeo hosted environment versus building out locally? We have done some comparison around that. And again, it will vary according to what you're doing in the PSTN connectivity and the pieces that are there. And I'd be glad to get you in touch with somebody to talk a bit more about what's that there. Again, so the idea is instead of deploying it to your own data center, you'd be deploying it to a co-located server or something else like that. So we have done some of that. I'd be glad to talk with you there. Is there a perfect storm scenario where the volume of traffic through the cloud could challenge its burstability? Excellent question. And there probably is at some time. As we threw a slide up there at some point in the Voxeo cloud, we have over 82,000 ports of simultaneous capacity going through our global infrastructure, and that's a heck of a lot of simultaneous calls that you have going through there. And there probably is some kind of perfect storm scenario that we could sit around and come up with where you could, totally max out all of that. But that would be a really, a really crazy type of scenario. We've seen people do very large scale, bursts and very large scale capacity. So it's an important question to ask and to find out what is the overall capacity of the cloud provider, of the cloud environment you're looking at. And how does that compare to what you can deliver on your own environment? How does that work? Because at some point, yes, there's always a max somewhere. But the question is, what would happen when you hit it? And that's, again, simultaneous. So, of course, if you're spacing things out, it could be more interesting. What is the, got another one here. Good. I love this. Love questions. Thank you. This is good stuff. Can you set up a SQL Server database on the cloud that interacts with Voxeo, and can you connect that server directly? Sure. So, yes, we have, if you look over at our blog site, our blogs.voxeo.com, and either in our Voxeo Developers Corner or the Tropo blog, we're doing mashups all the time with connections out of our hosted cloud over to a database, for instance, running on somebody else's, on some other service. Lately, we've had a number of folks who are really excited about CouchDB and the capability that's there, and so they're running it on, say, Couch One or something. So we have a hosted voice app running in Voxeo's cloud, either on our traditional XML side of the house or on our Tropos communication service using a web programming language there. But either way, they'll be running there, and then they'll be connecting out to the database running on somebody else's hosted service. And you can do that, just simply through a web services call to go and connect to that other environment. So yes, you could very easily go and do those type of things. Again, that comes down to one of those questions of, does it provide the performance that you need, or do you want to go and look at it to bring it into a premise or to do something like that? So, but yes, it can work. And sure, if you want to put a SQL Server database somewhere up, you could go and do that. Does Voxeo allow proxy premise deployments in its own hosted server environment? Yes, actually, we do have a process where we have what we call managed servers, where we would let you go and deploy a specific server up into our environment running proxy. So in that case, it's not, if you think about it in a cloud scenario, you're deploying your app up into the environment, and you don't know necessarily what server it's running on or where it's running. You don't even have to care. It can just be somewhere up in the cloud. The app is running somewhere. It might be on the server in some place in Asia. It might be in Europe. You don't even really have to know or care. But you can do a managed server where in that specific instance, you would have a server running in our data center or data centers that you would have, and you could do that. So yes, that is certainly something that you can go and do. And if you want to talk to our sales folks, they can help you around there. Another question that we have is, somebody asked, so how do you deal with disaster recovery in a hosted environment? So the answer to that, and if you look at our hosted white paper, we go into this at some length. We talk about this, but basically we over-provision. If you go and look at it, we put capacity into our facilities to cover over what's in the other facilities as well. So that, for instance, if our data center in Atlanta were to go down for some reason, those applications and the services that are there could fail over to our Orlando or Las Vegas data centers. And so we've provisioned the apps, we've provisioned the capacity so that can happen. So when you deploy a production app into our cloud, we've done that. Part of the process of deploying that is to look at where we provision the capacity, how we go and do that when we're looking at a large-scale application, being able to do that. We have something with, as you saw a slide on there, we have a 100% uptime guarantee. We have a service level agreement that you can contract with us for, and that will provide you with that basically 100% uptime, meaning that if there's any downtime, we would pay you for it. But more than that, it's an architectural choice where we go and make sure that it's running in different data centers, that we have capacity that can fail over and that can do all of that. So, so that's another good question to talk about. How do you do that? I have another one here. Well, actually, it's a kind of follow-on on that. As with the blackout in the Northeast in 2003, what is the DRBC answer to a wide-scale event like that where numerous hosted sites are affected? Well, that, again, goes back to this question I sort of just mentioned, where we talk about architecturally, how do we provision it, how do we set it up so that you can be able to go and have the capacity in the different locations so that if there were something like a large-scale blackout, you could be able to have those applications and calls, automatically fail over into one of the other data centers. So there's a lot of work that we've done on the back end to make sure that we can deal with that. If you just think about even geographic redundancy, I'll talk about here in the U.S., look at where we put our data centers. One of them is in Atlanta, one of them is in Orlando, one of them is in Las Vegas. So we do have some spread of geography around there so that they're not necessarily going to be all taken out by some kind of weather disaster or some kind of issue like that. So again, a good question around that. But again, it goes back to the scaling and the architecture that you set up and how you go and do that. Very good question. Other questions, comments, please feel free to put them in there. I have a question here. It says, you keep talking about premise, but isn't the word premises? Oh, those grammarians. Well, yes, we would technically say something about being on premises, on your premises or something, but the language is evolving, and so we're starting to say premise now more. I see that in more common usage. So what is it about grammarians? Anyway, let's see what other questions we have here. Okay. I see. Okay, good questions. Up. I see another one here. Let's see, what is that one? How many concurrent calls is the Voxeo hosted facility capable of? Well, again, if we go back to the overall capacity that we have is 82,000 ports. So that's, that's the simultaneous capacity across our entire infrastructure. So if you look at that, and then if you want to do Erlang calculations and stuff, I don't know how many calls that winds up. And it's all IP, it's all SIP too, so you've all wound up getting us out to that. And if you look at the hosting white paper too, we talk about, we have connections out to a whole slew of different SIP providers. So today, most PSTN connectivity is increasingly happening via SIP. So we've gone out to SIP providers, and we've set up what the world commonly talks about as SIP trunks, but essentially they're just IP connectivity out to providers who are then providing the PSTN connectivity. And we've done that across a whole range of different SIP service providers and across a number of different internet connections. So we have multiple levels of redundancy built into our own network infrastructure, so we can go and get that additional capacity out there and those additional items. We've had a person on our team for a while who spent a significant amount of his time basically chasing down more capacity in North America, working with providers, doing the interop, doing the testing, so that we have the ability to go and route calls across whatever. We're not dependent on a single host, a single PSTN connection, a single ITSP, Internet Telephony Service Provider, or SIP service provider. And that's actually a good question to talk to if you're looking at cloud communication services. What do they have on the back end for connectivity to PSTN? Because what are they, what are the capacity? In our case, we have it across a wide range, and these are some of the very large-scale carriers and some of the smaller carriers. We have a mixture of all sorts of people in there, so we're not, not dependent on one of them if one of them has some kind of problem there. Let's see. Oh, you guys this is great. I love these great questions. Okay, what's this one here? Is there any option to control the caller ID coming from the cloud? Yes, you can change in our applications. It is possible to go and change the caller ID and to go and to provide that if it's something that you're using as part of the application or some way to do that. So yes, you can do that. I have another question here. How do you prevent SIP DDoS attacks on the cloud? Oh, man, I could get into a whole session on that. That's a good one. So what a DDoS attack is, a distributed denial service attack. And so, if you think of recently WikiLeaks and what was happening with WikiLeaks, and it was the anonymous folks were going and doing DDoS, distributed denial service attacks against various different websites for people who were, opposing WikiLeaks, et cetera. And this was a very high, high publicity type of thing that was going on. So that type of attack is something that was being done in their case, targeting websites. Now, there are certainly tools and people out there who are looking at how do you do that against SIP. And on our end, what we've had to do is do some of that kind of testing around how do we harden our endpoints, how do we harden the security of our data centers to withstand that type of attack. And I don't want to take our time going into specifics around it, but I would say we have spent a good chunk of time looking at how do we go and do that, how do we have different SIP interconnects going out on different ISPs, and again, with our global infrastructure, we can also do that across different access points coming out of different data centers. So we have that, again, the distributed architecture that we have, along with a whole whack of security pieces that we put in place around looking at how do we deal with this, with throttling, with various different components that are part of that. And if you'd like to learn more about that, I'd be glad to have a conversation with you about that at some point in time. Let's see. Another question here. All right, we're back on with the 100% guarantee. What would be the response if a large disaster hits multiple sites and is strained by the customer base to the point where it's possible system performance being affected? So, okay, so to go back to that, the 100% uptime guarantee basically is if we have any kind of downtime, we would credit you, we'd credit your account, part of what you paid for us. I mean, we don't want you to pay for service you're not getting from us. We want you to be going back to our unlocked communications, we want you to stay with us because we provide the best platform, the best support, all that. And so we want to do that. We want to make sure we always get there. So if there was some kind of large disaster, hit multiple sites, and it was really strained, and there was some compromise in system performance, and we'd look at how we would credit you. But I would hope that our architecture is, and it's been tested. We've had a number of different cases. If you think of, we have weather events in various different areas. We've certainly looked at how we've gone and done this. We've done business continuity tests. We've taken a data center offline at times to go and test the failover into the other data centers. So we've gone through and done all that to make sure that it does, in fact, work. But, I mean, at the end of the day, if there was some kind of interruption, we would look at how we would credit you or how we'd make it right by you to go and do that. But certainly the way we built it is so that there would not be those kind of problems like that. Okay, and another question. So your larger customers, generally speaking, do they tend to deploy premise-hosted or a hybrid solution or both? And do they burst the cloud or they treat it as a blended capacity? Great question. So it depends, because again, it goes back a bit to, we have some very large customers who have deployed into our hosted cloud, and they've always stayed in the cloud. They've started out as a startup, and they've gone in the path, and they've gotten to be a larger company, a larger application, and they've stayed in the cloud all the time just because it made sense, and for all the reasons we articulated earlier on. We've had some customers who have taken a very large amount of our capacity into their premise. They've got a data center infrastructure. They've already got that there, and so they've gone and deployed it all on the premise. So I think that many of our largest customers are probably in a host environment, simply because as you get to a larger, if you go back to that curve I showed earlier, at some point it gets to be just more challenging to run a data center, and you just would rather have the capacity and the scalability off in a hosted cloud. And so it makes sense to push it all back out there into the cloud if you ever brought it on premise. And so a lot of our larger customers will be there. We do have some large customers who are entirely premise-based, and they've got their own environments and their own systems, and it makes sense for them. But we do see that. So I mean, I guess it somewhat depends. I'd say they probably bear more on the hosted side, but I know of some who are also premise on there. On the hybrid side, we have people who've done both. Some are blended capacity, where the calls come in, and then just depending upon availability, they'll either go into the hosted app or they'll go onto the premise. And we have a number that have it as a failover, a seasonal failover. If they're doing a large amount of outbound notification, they may have a certain capacity on their premise, but then they fail over into the cloud to do further outbound capacity when they have a large need to go and do notifications. Or we have some customers who do seasonal. If you had somebody who's doing, say, Valentine's Day stuff, this past week was a really critical time to have that, and they needed that seasonal overflow to be able to go and deliver that capacity through the hosted cloud. But then again, now that Valentine's Day is over, they don't need that capacity. It's there. So there's some folks who would go and work with that there. So again, it depends. Some of it's burst, some of it is blended capacity. It's there. Great questions. These are good. Oh, hey, and we got another one. All right, this is good. We got good stuff. Is the SMS messaging service available on the premise environment or just through the cloud? Actually, it is available on both. If you go into the and our focus is certainly around providing that in the hosted cloud because it's easiest and we can get you the connections and the connectivity up there. But we do have the capacity to bring that onto your premise so that you can be able to have a premise installation there, and then you can connect out into our service for the gateways that get you out to SMS and IM and Twitter and all of that. So it is possible to go into it either in that environment. Let's see. Anything else? Any more questions? Oh, yes, here we go. Is the SMS using short code or long code, and who registers the numbers? The answer is that we can do both. If you go up into our host environment right now and look at SMS, you're going to get a long code, which is a normal phone number for people who are not used to SMS. And it's a regular phone number. And most all of our SMS phone numbers that we have are, or most all of our phone numbers we provide are dual. They're both voice and SMS. So you can use the same number for voice, and you can also tell people to text to it, and it will work. And then your application can respond to either one of those. So generally, it's all there. We register numbers with a bunch of different providers that we use for this, and have that and can work with that. But we do have the capacity to work with short codes, and short codes are those things, text vote to 404040 or whatever, some typically 4 to 6 digit code that you go and do. We will work with you through the process of registering that. It takes a little bit longer because it is a process that you have to go through with the telecommunications, the larger carriers, to get that code registered and activated and all of that. But it's a process that we've gone through with customers and can work with you to go and get that code on there. And we can bring across other short codes. We can do those type of things and bring them into our environment. So it can be both of those. So either short code or long code. You can also port your own. If you have an existing phone number, you can port that in there into our environment. You also, if you're using 800 numbers, we are what's called a RESP org, which is an organization that's able to go and dip into the master 800 number database. And what's cool about this is that you can have an 800 number that goes into your application, and basically we can act as an abstraction layer, basically, so that if that application, the 800 number, can come into us, and then could either go into our cloud or onto your premise, that type of thing, and we can enable the failover very simply and very easily there, and be able to go and do some really interesting things in that environment. So if you work with 800 numbers, we have that capacity there. Okay, another one. Do you provide your own aggregator service for SMS? We work with a number of different companies to provide the incoming SMS connections. So we have that capacity here. We have another one here. Okay. So as some companies are constantly changing their corporate policies in regards to the use by employees of online communications like social media, do you alert customers prior to deploying new capabilities such as Twitter or Facebook? Excellent question. So yes, before we go and roll out the capacity to go and use a new service like Twitter or like Facebook or something like that, we certainly give people notification. We let people know about that, and it would not be. We don't turn it on necessarily by default. We will make it available. But for instance, when we rolled out the Twitter capability, at that point in time, Twitter was enabled across all of our Tropo applications, and so you could go and add a Twitter ID and basically have an automated agent that would be interacting with somebody over Twitter. But the capacity to do that was made available in the cloud, but then you needed to do it for your individual applications to go and assign a Twitter ID to a specific application that you might have. If you're familiar with how Twitter works, there's a authorization process using something called OAuth that lets you go and bind a Twitter account to an application, and so you have to go through that handshake in our cloud to go and do that. So it's not something that we don't just instantly make it available to by default. It's there. The process is there, so you can go and do it, and then but you have to actually go and initiate that connection out to Twitter. So if you had corporate policies that, for instance, said, thou shalt not use Twitter, then you would just simply not enable that capacity for your specific application. But that's a good question. Good thing around that. And another one here. Are your outbound SIP relationships channels from the host availability leveraged from a premise deployment, or a premise customer responsible for securing your own? Okay, so basically the question is, if I'm a premise installation, can I connect out to Voxeo's cloud to provide, to get SIP connectivity? Basically, can we provide that, or do customers provide their own? And the answer is that generally customers provide their own. And if you're interested to talk more about that or how you could use our connectivity on that, you certainly can talk to us, and we'll certainly be able to talk to you a bit about what we could do in that regard. But typically, customers are providing their own kind of SIP connectivity to have that. Let's see, anything else? These are great questions. Thank you. This makes it much more interesting when we have all these great questions on here. Okay. I think that's the questions that I see, and as it happens, we're coming up to our 1 hour mark, and so I think I will leave it there unless there are any final questions. Do you see any more, Sabina?
No, I don't see any additional questions. Thanks a lot, Dan, for the presentation and running through all the different questions that are coming up. If you're having additional questions, you can contact Dan York directly at danyork@voxeo.com. Thanks again for participation, and hope to see you soon in our next Jam Session or Best Practice Series webinar. Thank you. Bye.